The hall was enormous. So enormous that when Admiral Sarah Voss walked through the entrance doors, she tilted her head back and still could not find the ceiling. The ceiling was there, somewhere, swallowed by pale blue light that seemed to grow out of the walls themselves. She kept walking. Behind her came Ural Okafor, who was 32 years old and the best xenobiologist Earth had ever sent off planet, and who was currently trying very hard not to look impressed. She had promised herself on the shuttle ride over that she would not look impressed. She looked deeply, completely impressed. The station was called Oral, the Galactic Conclave's primary diplomatic hub, built 4000 years before humans had figured out that fire could be controlled indoors, and it was the size of a small moon. Not shaped like a moon. Just as large. Voss had read the numbers in the briefing files, but numbers and seeing are two entirely different things, and standing inside Oral Station made her feel like she was standing at the bottom of an ocean that had decided to be made of light instead of water. She did not let any of that show on her face. The Conclave's delegation was already in place when the humans arrived. 9 of them sat behind a curved table that rose slightly at the center, and at the highest point of that curve sat Ambassador Dren Kalos. He was old. Not old the way humans get old, soft around the edges, slowing down, running out of certainty, but old the way stone gets old, worn into a shape so permanent it had forgotten what it was before. His skin was pale grey and his eyes were the colour of water so deep that light had given up trying to reach the bottom, and he held a single data tablet flat in one hand without looking at it. He did not look up when the humans entered. He did not look up when they crossed half the length of the chamber. He only raised his eyes when Voss stopped directly in front of the table, folded her hands behind her back, and waited. His gaze moved over her the way a scanner moves over cargo it already knows the contents of. Voss had been scanned by better machines. She did not move. Humanity, Kalos said. His translator rendered it in perfect English. No accent, no curiosity, no warmth. Sector of origin, Sol system, arm classification -7, he continued, reading now from the tablet. Spacefaring status, confirmed, 91 standard years, territorial footprint, 1 star system, 3 occupied moons, 14 active deep space installations. He set the tablet down. You have been granted 40 minutes for formal address, he said. Voss stepped forward and she spoke. She talked for 38 minutes. She talked about Earth, not the wars, not the centuries of disaster, but the part that came after all of that, the slow and painful and sometimes outright ridiculous process by which 7 billion stubborn people had managed to stop trying to destroy each other long enough to look up at the sky. She talked about the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, where humanity had built its first colonies under conditions that had killed people and been built anyway, because that was the kind of thing humans did when they decided something was worth doing. She talked about the Endurance Asterisk, the ship sitting in Oral's docking bay right now, older than it had any right to be, held together by engineers who treated her like a patient they refused to let die. She talked about what humanity wanted. From the conclave, trade, real communication, a place at the table where the decisions that shaped the galaxy were made. She was a good speaker. She had always been a good speaker, even back when she was a mining colony kid from the outer ring of a station that smelled like recycled air and rust, where you learned to talk your way into things because you could not afford to buy your way in. Kalos listened to every word. He listened the way old stone listens to rain, present, patient, unmoved, waiting for it to finish. When she was done, there was a pause. Not the kind of pause that means someone is thinking. The kind that means something has already been decided and is simply being organized into words. The conclave thanks humanity for its address, Kalos said. He picked up the tablet again. Classification review is complete, he said. Humanity is designated Class 3, minor threat, resource sector restricted, expansion ceiling granted to Helios Arm, subsector 7, review cycle, 400 standard years. He set the tablet flat on the table again with a small, final sound. The conclave formally recognizes humanity's status within Galactic Registry, he said. You are welcome to make use of designated trade corridors as outlined in the documentation your vessel has already received. He stood up. He was done. The ceremony was over. Okafor leaned close to Voss's shoulder and said very quietly, "What does Class 3 mean?" One of the conclave's junior translators, a smaller creature with 3 pairs of arms folded neatly against its chest, heard the question and turned toward her. Class 1, it said in a helpful tone that suggested it explained this often, designates a species whose expansion or aggression poses a direct and measurable threat to galactic stability. These species are monitored at the highest level at all times. Class 2, it continued, designates a species with significant destructive potential, enough that active management and containment protocols are maintained. It paused, and there was nothing unkind in what came next because it did not occur to the translator that kindness was needed. Class 3, it said, is a species that is not dangerous enough to require significant conclave attention. Okafor nodded slowly. Right, she said. The chamber began to empty. The conclave members filed out through doors that opened and closed without a sound, and the vast blue hall became larger as it became emptier, and the two humans stood in the middle of it while their small team gathered quietly behind them. Voss looked up at the ceiling again. She found it this time, far above, vaulted and pale, carved with the history of a civilization that had existed longer than Earth had had liquid water on its surface. 400 years before they would look at humanity again. She thought about the 7 billion people who had watched this ceremony on a 12-minute signal delay because that was how far the broadcast had to travel, sitting in their homes and their offices and their colony modules, watching. She thought about the mining station she had grown up on, thin walls, recycled air, the constant smell of metal, and everyone working twice as hard as they were supposed to because the station went under if they didn't. She thought about what it felt like to be told you were not worth worrying about. They just told 7 billion people they don't matter, she said. She did not say it loudly. She said it the way a person states a fact they have every intention of changing. Okafor said nothing. She pulled out her field notebook, actual paper, which she carried because screens failed and paper did not, and opened it to a clean page. She began writing her assessment report. Her hands were steady. Her handwriting was not. 18 years passed. Not quickly. 18 years never pass quickly, but they pass the way hard work passes, which is to say you look up one day and realize how far you have come and also how tired you are. The Helios arm was not much to look at. The Conclave had assigned humanity an area of space called Helios Arm Subsector 7, which their Conclave's own records described as resource viable with limited strategic interest, which was a polished way of saying it was a stretch of asteroid fields, gas clouds, and one habitable moon that smelled strongly of sulfur. Humanity moved in anyway. Ural Okafor had been stationed on that moon for 6 of those 18 years, working out of a research outpost that the first settlers had named Holdfast, because that was the kind of name people chose when they were trying to convince themselves they were staying. The outpost smelled like sulfur and coffee and the particular sharp smell of electronics that had been running too long without rest. She had grown to love it in the specific way. You love something ugly that has never once let you down. Every morning she climbed a ridge of grey rock behind the outpost and looked out at the asteroid fields that humanity had spent 18 years turning into something the Conclave had never bothered to imagine. Mining platforms the size of city blocks. Construction rigs assembled from repurposed equipment that had originally been designed to pull or out of Earth's deep-sea floors, redesigned by engineers who looked at a problem and asked what they already had rather than what they wished they had. Jump relay stations, small, cheap, ugly, effective, strung out across the arm like lights on a wire, connecting colony to colony until the network had a pulse. Humans worked 22-hour shifts on those platforms. They worked on chemical stimulants and cold food and the kind of stubborn refusal to quit that their doctors back on Earth would not have approved of. They worked because the Helios arm was theirs, and they intended to make something of it that the Conclave could not dismiss with a 1-page file and a 400-year review cycle. Somewhere inside the Conclave's vast administrative systems, a minor analyst named Seal had been assigned to monitor Class 3 species activity in their designated sectors. It was not a prestigious assignment. Seal reviewed productivity reports from 17 Class 3 species, most of which required about 4 minutes of attention per quarter because most Class 3 species did exactly what was expected of them. Humanity required more than 4 minutes. The output numbers from Helios Arm Subsector 7 were wrong. Not wrong as in inaccurate, Seal had triple-checked, but wrong as in they did not match the projected development curve for a species 91 years into space travel with one star system and limited resources. A species at that stage was supposed to grow slowly, carefully, constrained by what it had. Humanity was growing like something that had decided constraints were a suggestion. Seal filed a flag report and sent it up through the appropriate channels. It was reviewed, noted, and filed in a subfolder that no one with real authority ever opened. Okafor did not know about Seal's report. She was busy watching a construction crew assemble the 4th Deep Space Processing Station in the Arms Outer Band, 3 months ahead of schedule, while simultaneously arguing with a supply coordinator over the comm about why she needed 12 more atmospheric sensors when her official allocation was 8. Because 8 is not enough, she said. Your allocation is 8, the coordinator said. And my research requires 12, she said. So either you send me 12 or I build 4 out of parts one will definitely steal from somewhere, and nobody wants that. She got 14. This was how most things worked in Holdfast, not through official channels but through the specific human talent for being more trouble to argue with than to simply give what was needed. Back on Earth, Admiral Sarah Voss had retired. She was growing tomatoes on a lunar agricultural colony, one of the older ones, established in the first wave of off-world settlement, smelling faintly of sulfur because all the colonies in the outer belt seemed to carry that smell no matter how far they were from its source. She had a small greenhouse module attached to her quarters, and she spent more time in it than she spent anywhere else. The tomatoes were difficult. The lunar soil mix was never quite right, and the light cycles had to be manually adjusted, and 3 separate crops had failed before she understood what the plants needed and gave it to them. The 4th crop grew. She was watching it one morning. The plants were finally red, finally ready, when her comm unit opened without warning. Her aide's voice was careful in the specific way that meant the news was not good. Admiral, the aide said, there has been a development in Helios Arm. Voss did not move from the plants. The Vorkai have filed a territorial expansion claim, the aide said. Under conclave historical precedent law, Class 1 species hold first right of claim to any sector with pre-contact resource extraction history. The Vorkai are claiming that a survey vessel passed through Subsector 7 approximately 600 years ago and logged it as a potential extraction zone. 600 years ago, Voss said. Yes. Before humanity was in space. Yes. Before humanity had a classification at all. Yes, the aide said. The conclave has reviewed the claim and found it valid under existing law. The formal annexation notice was issued this morning. All human installations in Subsector 7 are to be vacated within 90 days. All infrastructure built during the occupation period becomes the property of the Vorkai Territorial Authority. Under standard absorption protocols. Voss was quiet for a moment. Not a long moment. Every platform, she said, every relay station, every processing hub, everything humanity built in that arm over 18 years. Yes. Gone. Legally transferred, the aide said, because the aide was precise about language. The conclave considers the matter settled. Voss looked at the tomato plants. She had grown them from seeds she had saved from the previous failed crop, which she had grown from seeds saved from the crop before that. 3 failures. Then red. She reached out and picked one tomato from a vine, the first one ready, the best-looking one, and stood at the small sink in the corner of the greenhouse module and ate it standing up. It was good. She chewed slowly. She swallowed. Get me a ship, she said. The aide paused. Admiral, you are retired. I know what I am, Voss said. Get me a ship. 7 days later the *Endurance* left Lunar Dock, older now, more patched than before, carrying the particular dignity of something that had been repaired so many times it had become something new without anyone noticing. Okafor got the call 3 days after that. She was standing on her morning ridge, looking out at the processing stations that were now, technically, the property of a species that had sent a survey vessel through 18 years before humanity had been born into space. Right, she said to no one. She went back inside. She packed her notebooks. The *Endurance* arrived at the edge of contested space on a Tuesday. Humans had kept the 7-day week even in deep space, because some habits are too old and too stubborn to leave behind, and Tuesday felt like the right kind of day to do something unreasonable. Voss stood on the bridge and looked at the sensor display. The Vorkai fleet was already there, 12 warships arranged in a clean formation near the outermost human processing station, which was now officially called Vorkai Installation Keth 9 on all conclave maps even though the bolts holding it together had been driven in by human hands 3 years ago. They were large ships. The kind of large that is meant to make a point without saying anything. Okafor stood next to Voss and looked at the same display. That is a lot of ship, Okafor said. It is, Voss agreed. We have 1 ship. We do. Okafor nodded slowly the way she always nodded when she was deciding whether to say the obvious thing or trust that Voss already knew it. She trusted Voss already knew it. What are we doing? She asked instead. We are going to build something, Voss said. The plan had come to Voss somewhere between the lunar greenhouse and the *Endurance *S first jump point. Not a battle plan, not a political strategy, but an engineering idea. That had grown in the back of her mind the way good ideas grow, quietly and then all at once. During the 18 years in the Helios arm, human engineers had developed a jump gate prototype. Not the full-size gates that the major conclave species used. Those took decades and enormous resources to build, but a smaller, cheaper version. Ugly. Effective. The kind of thing only a species with limited resources and unlimited stubbornness would bother inventing because everyone else could already afford the real thing. The prototype had been sitting in *Endurance *S cargo hold for 8 months, waiting for the funding approval to test it in a safe zone. Funding approval had never come through. "We are going to build the gate," Voss told her engineering chief, a woman named Rook who had 16 years of deep space construction experience and the specific calm of someone who had seen too many dangerous situations to be frightened by new ones. "In contested space," Rook said. "Yes." "While the Vorkai watch." "Yes." Rook thought about this for 3 seconds. "What's the gate for?" she asked. "Transit," Voss said. "Open transit. No toll, no restrictions, no conclave fee schedule. Anyone who wants to use it can use it." Rook understood immediately. The conclave's transit fee system was one of its primary sources of revenue and one of the most complained about structures in the entire galactic trade network. Smaller species paid enormous fees to move goods through conclave-controlled jump corridors, and the fees were set by the conclave, which meant they were set to benefit the conclave. A free gate in the middle of contested space would not sit well with anyone who made money from keeping transit expensive. "They'll try to shut it down," Rook said. "They'll try," Voss agreed. "And we'll be in the way." "We will." Rook nodded once. "All right," she said, and went to talk to her crew. The construction took 3 years. 3 years of working in the shadow of a Vorkai fleet that watched and waited and filed 17 official complaints with the conclave, all of which the conclave reviewed and found technically difficult to act on because humanity was not building a weapon and was not violating any specific regulation that covered the construction of unsanctioned transit infrastructure in a disputed sector. The conclave's legal team had not anticipated this particular problem. Back at Oral Station, Ambassador Kalos received the complaint reports on his tablet every 2 weeks. He read them. He read the engineering assessments and the projected gate specifications and the traffic modeling that his analysts had run on what would happen if the gate opened. The traffic modeling was uncomfortable. The gate would work. It would work very well. And if it worked, species throughout the outer arms of the conclave, the smaller ones, the ones who paid the highest transit fees, would use it, and they would save resources, and they would begin to ask why nothing like this had ever been offered to them before. "A Class 3 species," Kalos said to his aide one evening, looking at the construction progress report on his screen. "Yes, Ambassador. Building infrastructure that a Class 1 species did not bother to build." "Yes, Ambassador. Because a Class 1 species did not need to build it," Kalos said. "They already controlled the infrastructure that existed." He set the tablet down. He said nothing else that evening. When the gate was finished, it was not beautiful. It was a ring of grey metal and repurposed relay components, bolted together by people who had been living on *Endurance * for 3 years eating ration packs and sleeping in shifts, and it sat in space like something assembled by hand because it had been. Voss opened a general broadcast channel. Not to the Vorkai. Not to the conclave. To every vessel registered in the 12 surrounding sectors. Trade ships, independent haulers, scientific vessels, diplomatic couriers, species humanity had never spoken to before. She gave them the gate's access codes. Free of charge. No registration required. No fee schedule. The channel closed. Her crew was quiet on the bridge. Then the Vorkai commander's hail came through, loud, formal, and furious. He gave Voss 60 seconds to power down the gate and withdraw from the sector. Voss looked at her crew. Each of them looked back at her. She opened the response channel. "We are aware of your position," she said to the Vorkai commander. "We are staying." She closed the channel. Okafor was already below in the engine room, which was where she always went when things were about to go badly because she found engines more honest than politics. They either worked or they did not, and the reasons were never complicated. She opened her field notebook. She wrote, *right, okay, so *. She looked at what she had written. She crossed it out. She had nothing else to write yet. Above her, the gate sent its first signal pulse out across 12 sectors, and somewhere in the dark of deep space, a small independent trade hauler, a species humanity had never met, running goods that the Conclave taxed at a rate that ate most of their profit, received the signal. They changed course. They came toward the gate. They were the first. They were not the last. The Vorkai fired on the gate 48 hours after the first trade ship used it. They did not fire on the *Endurance* first. They fired on the gate first, which told Voss something important about what they were actually afraid of. It was not the humans. It was what the humans had built, which meant the humans had built the right thing. The gate held. It was not supposed to hold. It was not designed to absorb weapons fire. It was designed to process transit traffic. But Rook had built it the way she built everything, with more structural tolerance than the specifications required, because in her experience the specifications were always written by someone who had never personally watched something fall apart in deep space. The gate held through the first volley. It buckled on the second. Voss moved the *Endurance* between the gate and the Vorkai fleet. Not a fast movement. A deliberate one. She took the ship to a position directly in the line of fire and she held it there. The Vorkai commander hailed again. "You are placing a Class 3 vessel in a military engagement zone," he said, and he said it with the specific tone of someone who could not quite believe what they were seeing. "Stand aside or we will go through you." "You are welcome to try," Voss said. She closed the channel. The *Endurance* was one ship against 12 Vorkai warships, and she was not a warship. She was a diplomatic vessel with 16 years of patches and a crew of 71 people who had just spent 3 years living on ration packs and had very little patience left for being told what to do. The Vorkai fired on the *Endurance*. The hit took out a section of the outer hull on the starboard side and killed 2 systems that Rook's team was already rerouting around before the damage report finished printing. Hull integrity dropped to 61%. The crew did not evacuate. Voss opened a new channel. Not to the Vorkai, not to the Conclave. She opened the general broadcast again, the same channel she had used to announce the gate's access codes, and she began transmitting *Endurance* S damage reports. Not encrypted. Not summarized. Raw data. Every hit, every system failure, every hull percentage point dropping in real time. Broadcast openly to every vessel in 12 sectors. "What are you doing?" her communications officer asked. "Asking people to watch," Voss said. At Oral Station, Ambassador Kalos was watching. His aide had woken him 3 hours into a rest cycle when the engagement began, and he had been at his monitoring post since then, watching the sensor feeds from the Vorkai fleet's own reporting systems. He watched the *Endurance* take a second hit. Hull integrity, 44%. He watched it not move. "She is broadcasting her damage reports openly," his aide said. "I see that. Why would a species?" "Because," Kalos said slowly, and he stopped. He looked at the feed for a moment longer. "Because they are not trying to frighten us," he said. "They are showing us what it costs them to." "Stay." The aide was quiet. On the sensor feed, a new signal appeared. Not from the *Endurance*. From one of the independent trade vessels that had been using the gate, a species called the Maradi, small traders from the outer arm who had been paying Conclave transit fees for 300 years. The Maradi ship moved. It moved to a flanking position beside the *Endurance*.
No formal declaración.
No communication to anyone. It just moved. Then a second vessel moved, larger, a long-haul cargo runner from a species Voss had never personally met, and positioned itself on the other side. Then a third. The Vorkai commander stopped firing. Not because he was beaten. Because the mathematics of the situation had changed in a way that had not been in any of the Vorkai tactical models, and the Vorkai were very good at mathematics. You could shoot at one Class 3 vessel and justify it under Conclave territorial defense law. You could not shoot at 4 vessels from 4 different species without starting something that required a very different kind of justification. He withdrew. The Vorkai fleet pulled back in good order, disciplined, controlled, and deeply confused, and the sensor feeds at Oral Station showed 12 warships moving away from the gate and the *Endurance* and the 3 vessels that had simply decided to stand there. Kalos looked at his aide. "Call a full session," he said. "All members, today. The schedule." "Today," he said. The conclave chamber filled within 2 hours. Kalos stood at the center platform, his place, the place he had stood for more sessions than he could count, and he placed humanity's file on the table in front of him. 1 page. He opened it. He read it. He closed it. The chamber waited. Someone spoke from the far end of the table, one of the older conclave members, a species who had been part of the governing body for so long that no one could remember when they had joined. "What do we reclassify them as?" the member asked. The question moved through the chamber. Every face turned toward Kalos. He had sat at this table through the classification of 4,312 sapient species. He had written the framework that the current classification system was based on. He had never in his life said what he said next. "I don't know," he said. The chamber was very quiet. Not the quiet of boredom or patience. The quiet of a room full of ancient and certain beings who had just heard something they did not have a category for. The classification system, Kalos said carefully, was built on a model that assumed a species' threat level could be measured by its weapons, its territory, and its rate of expansion. He looked at the closed file on the table in front of him. "We did not model for a species that builds a free gate in a contested sector and then parks a single damaged ship in front of 12 warships and broadcasts its own hull integrity to strangers," he said. "We did not model for strangers moving to stand beside it." He picked up the file. 4,312 species, he said, and we have never seen this before. He set it back down. "We need a new model," he said. On the *endurance*, at 44% hull integrity, Voss was in the small kitchen off the bridge eating a protein bar. It tasted terrible. She ate a second one. Okafor came up from the engine room with grease on her hands and looked at the viewport and the gate still standing. Outside it, and the 3 alien vessels still sitting beside them like neighbors who had wandered over during an argument and quietly decided to stay. She started her field notebook entry. She wrote 3 different versions. She deleted all of them. She looked at the gate. She looked at the 3 ships that had moved without being asked. She closed the notebook. The negotiation sessions were held at Oral Station. This time, the humans were not given 40 minutes. They were given a seat at the main table. Not a side chair, not a position behind the delegation rail where observers stood, an actual seat, at the curved table where the full conclave membership sat, with a nameplate that read, *Earth, Human Delegation * in 12 languages, one of which was English. Voss sat down in the chair. She did not look at the ceiling this time. She looked straight ahead at Kalos, who was looking straight back at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment while the rest of the room settled. Then Kalos opened the session. "The conclave is prepared to discuss reparations for the Vorkai annexation," he said, "including restoration of territorial rights in Helios Arms Subsector 7 and compensation for infrastructure losses. We are also prepared to discuss an expanded expansion ceiling for human-occupied space and a revised fee structure for human use of conclave transit. Corridors." He folded his hands on the table. "We hope this represents a satisfactory beginning," he said. Voss looked at the documents her team had placed in front of her. She did not look at them for long. "That is a fair beginning," she said, "but it is not what we came here to discuss." The room shifted. Not loudly. Conclave sessions did not shift loudly, but the specific quality of attention in the chamber changed, the way air changes before weather. Kalos waited. Voss placed her own document on the table. It was longer than 1 page. "We are not here for territory," she said. "We have territory. We know how to build in it, and we will continue to do that regardless of what this table decides. What we are here for is a structural change to the classification system." She pushed the document toward the center of the table. "The current system assigns a number to a species based on a 30-day assessment window," she said. "It assigns that number before the species has had time to demonstrate anything except what it looks like in its first 30 days of contact, and then it uses that number to determine what that species is allowed to do, where it is allowed to go, and how much it is charged for the privilege of existing in galactic space." She leaned forward slightly. "The Vorkai took 18 years of human work because a survey vessel flew through our Sector 6. 100 years ago, and conclave law said that counted. That is not a flaw in how the law was applied, it is a flaw in the law itself, and the flaw exists because the system was built by species who had already decided who mattered before anyone else arrived." The chamber was very quiet. Kalos looked at the document. He did not pick it up yet. "You are proposing a reform of the classification framework," he said. "We are proposing that the classification framework be replaced with something built on a different question," Voss said. "Not, how dangerous is this species, but, what does this species need in order to become a full participant in the galactic community, And what does the community need to provide in order to make that possible? One of the older conclave members, the one who had asked what humanity would be reclassified as, spoke from down the table. The framework you are describing does not include threat assessment, the member said. No, Voss said. The current system exists because threat assessment protects the stability of the conclave. The current system, Voss said, protected the conclave stability well enough that a Class 3 species built a transit gate in contested space and 3 unaffiliated species moved to defend it without being asked. If that is what stability looks like, I would suggest the model needs adjusting. The member was quiet. Kalos requested a private session. He cleared the chamber of all aides and junior staff and secondary delegates until it was only him and Voss and Okafor, who stayed because Voss did not go anywhere without her anymore, and a translator unit running quietly in the corner. He looked at Voss for a long moment. You knew, he said. From the first day, the ceremony, the classification, you knew what had been done to you. Yes. Why did it take 18 years? It was a real question, not a political one. Voss heard the difference. It didn't, she said. It took 18 years for us to have something worth protecting. Kalos was quiet. The gate, he said. The gate, she said. He looked at the table. We built our stability on controlling what already existed, he said, not to her exactly, more to something he was working out. You built something new and then made it free, and species came to you because of that. Yes. That is not a threat model we had accounted for. No, Voss said. It wouldn't be. The treaty was signed 11 days later. It was not everything humanity had asked for. Nothing signed at a table with 1,000 years of existing power on the other side is ever everything. But the classification system's 400-year review cycle was formally struck from conclave law, and the 30-day assessment window was extended to a 10-year integration period for all newly contacted species, and the transit fee structure was overhauled by a joint committee that included 2 human engineers who had opinions about fee structures that made the conclave economists visibly uncomfortable. The Vorkai restoration of Helios Arms Subsector 7 was completed within 90 days. The processing stations came back with Vorkai repair markings on the sections they had accidentally damaged during the withdrawal. Nobody commented on this officially. Okafor went back to Holdfast on the first available shuttle. The sulfur smell hit her before the doors opened. She stood outside the outpost in the grey morning light of the moon and breathed it in and looked at the processing stations in the distance, back where they belonged, and at the new research building that had gone up while she was gone, and at the coffee line already forming outside the main hall because humans move fast when left to work. She opened her field notebook. She wrote, *right, okay, so *. She looked at it. She crossed it out. She thought for a while. She wrote 2 words. We are here. She closed the notebook. She went inside to get coffee. On the endurance still at 44% hull integrity because there had not been time to fix it and there was always something else that needed doing first. Voss sat alone at the viewport in her quarters and looked at the stars. She did not look like a person who had won something. She looked like a person who was very, very tired and had no intention of stopping. The gate was still out there in Subsector 7, running free transit around the clock, and the signal log showed 43 vessels had used it in the last 24 hours, species from 11 different conclave classifications, moving through without paying, without registering, without asking permission. She looked at the stars for a long time. Then she got up. There was work to do.